Let me see. I'm having some issues with the computer here, but all right. I think we are about ready to get started. I know that we have 3 other folks who should be joining us, but we'll go ahead and get started just so we can be respectful of all of your time. So, Mingy, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, evening everybody. Hope everybody's doing well, having a good week. By now, of course, you read the email that I sent out on Sunday evening, and um, I don't like doing that because it means we collectively, or enough of us, have come up short in some way, and it's kind of like our way of giving a last warning, a last statement saying, "Hey, get yourself together, or we have to move on." And unfortunately, following up on that, we had to move on from one of the members of our delegation. We take this very seriously. We know how much fun Kona can be and how much more fun it can be when you're prepared and we are collectively prepared. And we take exception to anyone who is not going to do that. And we know you have priorities all over the place right now between graduations and SOL testing and AP testing and everything else that's going on. But we have expected from the start and continue to expect, and will continue to expect you to make this a priority. And um, if something comes up that's beyond reasonable control, communicate with us and we'll figure things out. But otherwise, we expect you to take care of what you're supposed to take care of when you're supposed to take care of it. And if there are any questions regarding that, I'd be happy to take them. Sharon, if there's anything I've forgotten to say, please jump in.
Nope, I think that says it all. All right. Well, if you guys have questions at any point during the webinar, you can do like usual and type them in the web chat there. I will do my best to answer them as we're going along. I'm recording this webinar because we do have a number of people who had some other things going on tonight, which, we understand because it is that time of year where everybody is busy. So we will be sending this out to everybody to view afterwards as well. So, all right. So here's the agenda for what we're doing tonight. So a lot of this we used to cover in our in-person meetings. So we're going to do it as quickly as we can tonight while giving you all some good information about speeches. We're also going to review some committee procedure and talk a little bit about combining proposals with other folks. We're going to just touch on research. I know you all watched Spencer's research webinar that he did earlier. Talk a little bit more about some of those expectations and some deadlines, and then we're going to talk about some goals that we all have for ourselves. So if you've been to a bill writing workshop or you've been to Kona before, you have likely seen this wheel. It's called the Golden Circle. If you have not watched the TED Talk on Start With Why, I highly suggest it. It's by Simon Sinek, and he also has a book of the same name. So his principle is that most people in the world, when they're talking about something, they talk about what it is first. The details about, what's the thing you want to change. And then you talk about how you're going to change it. And then maybe you get to the why at some point. And his theory is that you need to start with why. It's more compelling to people if you start with why your proposal is so important. Rather than just say, well, here's my proposal that will change this law and make it so this is illegal and this changes. Start with why. It's so important to have mental health screenings for our prison guards because, of the sensitive work they're doing and so forth. So think about why you're doing what you're doing. One of the worksheets that we have for you in the file section that we would like for you to turn back into us is a Start With Why worksheet that has this on it. So we want you to think about your own proposal and think about your why. Why is it that your proposal is so important? So think about that. Make sure you fill out that worksheet and send it back to us. It'll have what's your why, what's your how, what's your what. And then we also have a spot on there for you to fill in about, how is your proposal important nationally and internationally? Things like that, how is it feasible? So that way you can kind of like use that as your starting point for your speech to figure out how it's going to resonate with all the people at Kona. All right, so up on the screen here, I have a couple of different techniques for you all when you're doing your speech. So there's lots of ways to give a good speech. I'm sure you've heard a lot of good ones at MGA. If you've been to Kona before, you've heard some good ones. And you've also probably heard some terrible ones. You've probably had some people get up there who don't explain at all what their proposal does. They don't tell you why. They might tell you what something does, but not why it's important. So we've put up here a couple of suggestions of different ways that you could start your speech. Sorry, I'm muting everybody. All right, getting back to it. So one thing that we've had a couple of people do before when they have a proposal that might be a little bit hard to understand or people might be misinterpreting it is they talk about what their proposal does not do. So we've had them in the past where people totally misunderstood the point and thought that, I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but they couldn't quite remember what it was their proposal did. So they started off by saying, this proposal does not make this illegal. It does not do this. It does not do this. Here is what it does. And then they explain what it did. So that kind of got all of the stuff out in the forefront of what their proposal is not doing. So people didn't get bogged down on incorrect debate. We've all been in situations where people misunderstand something that you're saying and go off topic, and it's not a very good situation to be in. So you can kind of head that off by telling what your proposal does not do. So that's one technique you can use when writing your speech. Another one is telling a story. So finding somebody out there who is affected by whatever your proposal is. So last year, Parker did his proposal on texting 911. And I believe he had found some accounts from people who had said, man, if I had only been able to text 911, I would have been able to get out of some situation. So he had a story to tell that was about why his proposal was so important. So bringing it down to making it personal for somebody about why this proposal is so important, telling somebody's story. So I highly suggest that as a good technique as well. The bandwagon approach is basically saying, well, all these other places are doing it. We need to do it too. We need to get on this bandwagon. So for some of your proposals, this works well because there are some things that other states are already doing and we need to make it a national issue. And you can just say we need to join them. Or if you find other countries that have similar things, other countries that are respected by the US, you can find some ways to jump on the bandwagon and say, these people are doing it, it works great. Why aren't we doing that here in our country as well? So that's something you can do. Something that we've seen that's really effective is using repetition. So if you have a phrase that you mention a couple of times that you really want people to get in their head, or using some alliteration or something like that. But if you say something a couple of different times, people will understand and remember what it is you're talking about. So that's an approach you could use if you have something that you really want to stick with people. Something else you can do is get all warm and fuzzy. So if you have a story to tell that might get more on the emotions, that might make people feel really good, you can do that and have it relate to them that way as well. It's also really good to put some facts in your proposal or in your speech. You want to make it as easy as possible. So a lot of you have facts in your proposals that people can read. The proposals will probably be very small on a page, but people will be able to read that. Your speech should not be just repeating your proposal that you have written already. You can have some small, easy facts in there that people can get and understand and won't misinterpret. You don't want them to misinterpret whatever it is you're saying or to take some fact way out of proportion for you. So make sure you're talking to the group. They're very smart people in there, but they may not understand the nuances of whatever your topic is. So make some small, easy facts for them. Flattery is another technique that we suggest using. People like hearing good things about themselves. And it kind of goes along with rhetorical questions as well. You can ask them rhetorical questions or, wouldn't you want this? Things like that will help people relate sometimes of, well, yeah, I do want this to be a law. It affects me, and it's something, I do a great job at this, so I think everybody should want this. So those are some things you can use as well, to help relate to your audience, because your audience is truly the ones who will decide whether or not your proposal moves on. So you need to connect with them well. Another one, putting the audience in your shoes. So, if this were you, what would you want to do? If this were you, wouldn't you wish that this policy was in place already? So trying to make it personal for them and to put it so that way they're imagining how their life would be affected by the change you're trying to bring. So that's another good way to connect with your audience. And then the biggest thing that we can tell you is to memorize your speech. Nobody wants to have that person up there who's staring down at their note cards or staring down at their speech, and not connecting with the audience. The people who do the best, you'll notice, are the people who practice a lot. There are a lot of people there who will have their speech completely memorized and won't even bring anything up with them. We don't suggest that. We suggest you still have a copy you bring up with you along with your research notebook, so you have all of your research there. But the most important thing you can do is be confident in your speech, so you're not having to sit and read it off of a page. So that way it's mostly just there as a backup for you. So you should be practicing. You're writing it now. It's due to us, I believe, in the next 10 days or so. And then you've got a month to really, really work on your speech and get it to where you have it mostly memorized, if not all the way memorized. So we expect you to be able to basically do it by memory. Some things to keep in mind that you should not do in your speech. Do not yell at your audience. You will notice as the week goes on, especially, that people tend to get up to the microphone, and as they get more and more passionate, they start screaming into the microphone. That is not good for anybody. All it does is make it so everyone rolls their eyes and says, oh my gosh, somebody else is yelling again. Usually you can't understand what they're saying when they yell. So please make sure that you are being kind and courteous and speaking in an even, calm voice as you're giving your speech. Don't speed read either. You'll see people who get up there and just utter a bunch of words, and it's so fast that you have no idea what it is they're saying. That shows that you're not prepared. And since being prepared is one of the things your proposal is ranked on, if you're just up there reading your speech and speed reading, then people are going to say, well, you didn't prepare very well. They must have just written their speech in the bus on the way down here, because there are a lot of people who do that. There were some people yesterday looking for proposal ideas, and they were due to the conference by last night. So you'll notice that there's a lot of people who won't put a lot of the same work and effort in that you all have. We want to have you all in the best position possible. Do not insult anyone when you're up there. There are people from about 40 different states who are here. So do not be insulting to any region of the country. Do not be insulting to anybody from any particular state, anything like that. Don't talk about, minority groups or any other groups. Don't insult anybody. Rise above that and be the people who are going to be kind and courteous to others. We don't all have to get along, but you have to be kind and courteous to everybody. So don't insult them or use any kind of derogatory language. We had somebody a couple of years ago, not from Virginia, thank goodness, but we had somebody who called immigrants the rotten carrots in the stew of American life. And that was a very insulting thing that somebody stood up and said at the front of the conference. That's not what we expect. And if that had been any one of you, you would have been on your way home. We wouldn't have stood for that at all. So we want you all to use good, proper language and to debate issues and not people. Something else that you'll notice a lot of other people doing that we do not want you all to do is to make up facts. If you don't have something, if you don't have a fact for somebody, you can say, make note of it while you're up there and say, I'll try and get to that in my closing speech. Or if you don't have it, just say, I'm sorry, I don't have that statistic. But don't just make something up, because if you make something up and they have the statistic, they can come back and use that against you. And it again shows that you're not prepared. So please make sure, it's much better to say, I don't have that information than to make up something. But you also should be spending the time between now and Kona trying to do the research so you do have as many facts as possible. Also, don't give any facts without citation. If you know of something, your research notebook should be organized to where you can know exactly where that statistic came from. But if you give a fact and then somebody says, well, what's your source for that fact? And you say, oh, I don't know, you may not as well have even said the fact because there's no validity behind it. So make sure everything that you're researching, that you have copies of it in your research notebook and you know exactly where all of your facts came from. One of the conference rules is you cannot use props or gestures. So don't get up there and point to things or point to people. You can't bring up any charts of any kind. You can't hold up your research notebook and point to a chart or anything like that. It's all just your words you're supposed to be using. Your body language should be, a nice, upright, looking confident in front of everybody, but don't do a lot of gesturing. If you're a person who likes to talk with your hands, try to make sure your hands aren't doing tons and tons of gesturing. You're not going to get in trouble if you do a little bit of motion with your hands, but if you're pointing or doing other things, you will get in trouble for that. And the more you practice, the less you will say or make some of these distracting movements. So you want to make sure you're practicing in front of as many groups as you possibly can. If you are still in school right now, practice your speech for a class. If you're not, go find some groups of friends or some neighbors or somebody at your church. Try and practice in front of as many people as you possibly can so you're comfortable with it. So Minky or Spencer, anything to add to those couple of techniques?
No, just reiterating, practice, practice, practice. You can't practice enough.
Yeah, no, that sums that up for me.
Okay. All right. Well, we will move on to the next slide. All right, so every speech at Kona has to begin and end the same way. So this is a bit different from MGA. You don't just get up and, start talking. For every time you speak, you have to have a couple of different things you say. So the first thing you should do is thank the chair. So thank you, Sir Chair, thank you, Madam Chair. And then you introduce yourself. We suggest that you do first name, last name, and then Commonwealth of Virginia. You can do just last name in Commonwealth of Virginia, but it's better for people to know who you are first name and last name. So if it were me, I'd say, thank you, Madam Chair, Sharon Davies, Commonwealth of Virginia. And then you say, I reserve my right to yield any remaining time to my summation. That signals to the chair that any remaining time you have on your speech, you are already reserving the right to yield that to your closing summation. So you have to ask for things like that before you do them. You can't just yield your time. So basically, if you read the Mountain Manual, you'll be able to see that's in there. So you'll say that, and then they will say, that is your right. And then you give your speech. And then at the end of your speech, you say, thank you, I yield any remaining time to my summation. Something that you will notice as well is most of the chairs will give you a knock on the table at 30 seconds. I think it's 30 seconds remaining, and a double knock at 10 seconds remaining for your speeches. So that gives you a time signal so you can know when to wrap up. Everything is timed. We'll go over the times in just a moment, but you can't just get up and give a 5-minute speech. You cannot go over time. If your time is up and the chair says, thank you, your time is up, you need to stop talking. Don't be one of those people who tries to keep talking and get thoughts in. If the chair says time is up, time is up. We did have an incident last year where somebody from one of the other groups decided he did not want to yield any time and just stood there and I will not yield, I will not yield. And the presiding officer just went on and picked the next person, and it was eating into their time, and that person was dealt with by conference leadership later. So definitely not something you should do. So I do have a template under files where you will be able to have that already at the top of your speech and at the end. So you'll be able to have those in there.
And Sharon, if we could put on real quick, when you do an action like that, like the delegate did last year, not yielding his time at the end and not and interrupting somebody else speaking, not only are you making yourself look bad, you're making our delegation look bad. And there are points at which our entire delegation can get in trouble. And even if it's not officially getting in trouble, making us look bad can harm us in other ways. So you're not just representing yourself at that point. Everybody's going to know, hey, that's a Virginian. Hey, that's a whatever state. And we don't want that reflecting upon us.
Very true words. All right, so I'm not going to pull this up now because we don't have time, but I'm going to send this out. I'll put the slides up on the Google site later, and you'll be able to click on here and watch. So on the first link, if you scroll forward to the 2 hour and 49 minute mark, you'll be able to see an opening speech in, I believe it's plenary. It's about having naloxone for overdoses, and we have a Virginian who gets to give one of the intent speeches there, which is really cool to watch. So you can watch this. We suggest you watch this one just because I think it's done really well. But you can see her opening speech and how she uses some of those different techniques we talked about to connect with the audience, how calm she is. She's not rushing through things. She knows what she's talking about. You can watch her answering questions. She does a really good job with the non-debatable technical questions of knowing what her responses are going to be. She's not searching for them usually. So I think those are really good to watch. And then because it's such a long file, you'll have to start over on the second one to watch the rest of it, but we highly suggest you watch that just to see kind of how debate goes at Kona. It's a bit different in first, second, and third committee than it is later, but we'll go over that as well. All right, so first, second, and third committees. The timing goes like this. You have 2 minutes for your opening speech. So that's when you thank you, Madam Chair, Sharon Davies, Commonwealth of Virginia. I reserve my right to yield any remaining time to my summation. The minute you open your mouth and say thank you to the chair, that is when your timing starts. So if you are practicing, start your stopwatch as soon as you start speaking that. It doesn't start after you say all that. It starts before you say it. So if you take 15 seconds to say that and you aren't confident with it, that's eating up your time. So you have 2 minutes there. We suggest you make your speech about 1.5 minutes, 1.45 minutes. That gives you some time in case you do stumble over your words at any point. So make sure that you're timing it that way. When you turn your speech into us, you need to have practiced it several times, and it definitely needs to be right at the 2 minute mark, if not under. If you send us a speech that's very obviously going to be a 4 minute speech, we're going to send it back and say, try again. And when you send me your speech, I'm also going to ask for you to send me how much time it takes when you practice it. So that way we know you've practiced. After your opening speech, there is a 2 minute period for non-debatable technical questions. So I think a lot of you you all asked the questions because you had to. Some of them were ruled debatable. I know Minky was kind of watching out for a lot of those to see which ones would be considered debatable. And a lot of them, there are ways that you can phrase your question to make it not debatable. Some of them are just very debatable. You can't really do hypotheticals in this. You can't ask, well, what could happen if this? That's more debatable because you can't really see the future. But it's more about, statistics, figures that you have, very quick yes or no things, clarifying questions. What's your source for this? Those are some good non-debatable technical questions. And again, if you watch that video and the link that I had before, you'll be able to see kind of how they go. And what they'll do in first committee is usually they'll call on somebody in their chair. They'll stand up and ask the question and then sit down, and they'll call on somebody else. When it gets later and there's bigger and bigger rooms, there will be lines of people at microphones, and they'll just go back and forth from one microphone to the other asking questions. So it's kind of rapid fire. So if you're the author up there at the front, you'll be getting rapid fire questions. And then after that, they start pro-con debate. So they will ask for somebody who is against the proposal to speak con on the proposal. So they will get 1.5 minutes to speak con. At this point, you can do a couple of different things, and I do have a cheat sheet that we will give you so you can kind of see. You can ask the author a possible series of questions. Even if you only have one question, you should ask for a possible series of questions because you might think of a follow-up that their answer gives. And then you reserve your right to speak thereafter because you want to make sure you're able to speak afterwards. If you only want to ask questions, that's fine. But if you want to speak afterwards, you would say, Sharon Davies, Commonwealth of Virginia, will the author yield to a possible series of questions, and I reserve my right to speak thereafter. And again, this all sounds foreign right now. It will come second nature by the time you get to second or third committee. And you'll be able to practice it. And the committee chairs are very good in the earlier committees about really trying to help you out. So you'll have a con speaker for 1.5 minutes. then a pro speaker who's speaking for it, then a con, then a pro, then a con. And it kind of goes that way. So usually it's about 5 different speakers speaking on it. Like I said, you can ask questions. If you are speaking pro, if you only are speaking, I always suggest that you reserve your right to yield in your remaining time to the author's closing summation. That gives the author more time at the end to come up with rebuttals to some of the cons that were spoken. So we have it on the cheat sheet as well. If you're speaking con, I don't think it's a good idea to give the author more time in their closing summation because you're not for their proposal. So why would you want to give them more time and more of an advantage? So we highly suggest only doing that if you're pro. And then after that, you have 2 minutes for a closing summation. So the closing summation should not be all scripted. You shouldn't have it all written out because that's your time. You'll be taking notes during all of the debate, so that way you can, rebut all of the cons that were against you. So if somebody has something they've said that is completely out of line, you can address that. You can re-emphasize some of the things that the pro speaker said. If somebody had asked you a question in the non-debatable technical questions that you couldn't find the answer to at that moment, you can answer those in your closing summation because you can look a little bit through your research notebook to find it while you're up there. So what I always suggest is that you have a little bit of time at the beginning to address some of the cons, and then have about a 30-second to a minute thing prepared to kind of close out. So kind of your last things. You don't want to get up there with nothing, because if you get up there with absolutely nothing, then it's going to look like you're not prepared at all. And again, being prepared is one of the most important things because that's what people are ranking you on. So make sure that you are have that about 30 to 60 seconds of stuff prepared, and then some more time to address some of the other things. A lot of times in the earlier committees, people don't use the full time, but as debate gets more and more and there's more people in the room, people tend to use every second that they have. All right, GA and plenary are a little bit different. So that you have more time for these. So for General Assembly and plenary, you get 4 minutes for your opening speech. So you have more time. So, should you make it to third committee, I would start putting some thought into what else could you add to your opening speech. Are there other stories you could tell? Is there more detail you could put in? So that way you're not caught unaware, especially if you're one of the first ones in GA. So, put some thought into that if you start to make it to third committee. So 4 minutes for that. And then there's 4 minutes for non-debatable technical questions. So it's a longer period of time, which is good because you have a lot more people in the room for this. You have a third of the conference in the room for General Assembly and the entire conference in the room for plenary. So there's always lots of questions. I don't think I've ever really seen a proposal that didn't have enough questions. Then for these, we have something that are called intent speakers. So intent speakers for GA and plenary, when they announce the docket, I believe they'll announce it Tuesday night at the dance. You can go online and sign up. If there's a proposal you really like or you really dislike, you can get on and try and sign up for the opportunity to give a con or a pro intent speech. What we highly suggest is that you pick 1 or 2 and don't sign up pro and con for every single one. There are some people that will do that. There are some delegations that will sign every kid up for every con and pro, and they just get what they get. We want you to pick ones you're passionate about. The one that you'll watch on that YouTube video, Salome was very passionate about it, and she spent a lot of time on her intent speech. She used every minute that she had up there. I know that she spent a lot of time in the research room working on it. She spent a lot of time, I believe this is the year that Mingy wasn't there, but she ended up calling Mingy and reviewing some things with him.
That's correct.
Yeah, to make sure that everything was good to go. She practiced it with a bunch of us there. So she knew she got to give this speech. So you can tell it's a very prepared, very good speech. She doesn't have to speak off the top of her head. She could put a lot of time and effort and research in. If you're the pro intent speaker, it's great to work with the proposal author and say, what can I do to help you out? We had somebody a couple of years ago who got to give one for one of her friends, and they worked really well together to make sure, you know, that she wasn't going to say anything that the proposal author was already saying, or the, you know, the proposal author had a lot more research on it and she could give her some more research to do some work on. If you're the con intent speaker, unfortunately, you probably can't go to the proposal author because they don't want to talk to you because you're speaking con, but the research room is available. We are all available to for you to run the speech by us if you get one of those speeches. Sometimes you don't get a ton of speech or a ton of time to do the speech if you're one of the first ones up in GA, but you know, most of the time you've got, you know, a little bit of time to do some research on there. So after the con intent speech that's 3 minutes long, there is a 2-minute pro intent speech. And then we do the typical con pro debate. Those are 2 minutes long. And then the author has a 2-minute closing summation. Something that's a little bit different in third committee, GA, and plenary is that instead of just asking questions or speaking, you can bring somebody else up with you. So if you watch that video, you'll notice everyone, when they get called on to speak, everyone still keeps their placard up and they're picking somebody else to come up with them. That's something you can do starting in third committee, but in first and second committee, you cannot do that. All right, we're going to briefly talk about the amendment process. It's very hard to get amendments heard at KONA. It's easier in the first couple of committees, but you have to submit it in writing to the clerk. So the clerks at the front, there's always a chair and a clerk. They will have amendment sheets and you can fill that out and submit the amendment to the clerk. However, it's not like an MGA where they read every single amendment in front of everybody. Somebody has to make a motion to hear the amendment. So if they're getting up to speak, they could, you know, say permission to speak on the proposal and I reserve my right to make a motion thereafter. And they would speak on it and then they could say, and I make a motion to hear the amendment on the floor. And then, you know, you have to see if everyone wants to. And then if they do, there's the author of the amendment gets 1 minute to speak about why they made the amendment. Then somebody gets to give a con speech on the amendment. Somebody gets to give a pro speech. Then the proposal author gets 30 seconds to talk about whether or not they like the amendment. Sometimes they really like it and say, this is great. This is exactly what I wanted. This fixes the problem that I realized I had. Sometimes it completely derails their proposal and makes it mean something totally different and they're against it. And then you guys vote on the amendment and the majority wins. So if the majority of people say yes, then it passes. And that's how the proposal is amended from now on. It's something that sometimes some very ungermane, I guess if that's a word, amendments get up there. We had one several years ago that ended up being about sending prisoners to the moon or something like that. It was very crazy and bizarre to watch. But, you know, if you see somebody who has been working hard on an amendment and you see the amendment form go up to the front, it's always a nice thing to try and hear the amendment. So you can get up there, like I said, and speak and then make that motion to hear the amendment afterwards. All right, so proposal ranking. You're going to be ranking every proposal on these 5 criteria, which we've talked about a couple of times. And just remember, a 1 is a thumbs down and a 5 is a high five. Is that right? Mingy, Spencer, do I have it right or do I have it backwards? I can't recall off the top of my head.
Are you referring to the number ranking or total score?
Well, both. 1 is bad now and 5 is good now, correct?
Correct. High five is, high five. Yay, okay. We got 5.
Good. I just wanted to make sure this was current. I just had a moment in my head where I thought maybe I had it backwards. So it used to be the old way. Now they've changed it. So a 1 is, thank you. A 1 is bad. A 5 is good. So if somebody's proposal is not important at all, you would give them a 1 in that criteria. If they had evidence that they've done no research at all, they would get a 1. If their proposal is totally not something that is even in the realm of possibility, it would get a 1. If their preparation and presentation is really terrible, they would get a 1. And if their proposal is very unoriginal because there's lots of other people with the same idea, it would get a 1. So their total score could be a 5 if it was really bad. 5 is the highest you can give somebody in one of these areas. So everybody's score will be between a 5 and a 25. So you'll get the ballot that will have all of these different rankings on them. So you'll be able to like actually sit there and judge what they would get in each one and then add up the score. So make sure that you are paying attention to these ranking criteria, because that's really what you should be ranking the proposals on. You shouldn't say, oh, I love this proposal, I'm going to give them a 25 because I really like it. Because sometimes the proposals that are the best written, they have the worst speeches for, or they just are totally, on the wrong path to getting to the right solution. So make sure you're not just prejudging them in your head. You're actually listening to their research and seeing how they've prepared when you're ranking. Also, we're going to talk about combining in just a few minutes, but if you combine your proposal with somebody else, you have 1 ranking. So if there's 3 of you that have the same topic and you guys decide to join forces and have just 1 proposal among the 3 of you, you all 3 have to rank together on 1 ballot for every proposal, as long as your proposal is alive. So make sure that the people that you are going to be working with, if you just decide to do that, are people that you also would like to be ranking with. Also, just a quick note on your ballots, you will have to write your committee name on it. So your committee name will be a letter in first committee, A through Z. It'll be a number 1 through 12, I believe, in second committee, and then a color in third committee. So make sure you put the correct committee on there and you put the correct proposal number. All of the chairs and clerks will have paper at the front where they will have the proposal numbers written in order. Make sure you put the correct proposal number on it. If you do not, then your ballot is likely going to be thrown out in the bean room. So you don't want that to happen. You want your proposal to count, or your ranking to count. All right, so this is the updated flow chart for how proposals advance this year. It might be a little bit small on your screen. So everybody starts off in their committee A through Z. There's probably 20 or so people, 20, maybe 25 people in your first committee. So you go through that first day and you hear everybody's proposals. 9 proposals will move on from that first committee. So already over half of the people at the conference don't have a proposal alive anymore, because only 9 move on from the first committee. Then, so what will happen then in second committee is there are going to be groups that are combining. So A and B come together to be committee 1, and they have 18 proposals. C and D come together to become committee 2, 18 proposals. So you'll get to hear half of the proposals that you've heard before and half that are going to be brand new to you. And they might be totally different subjects, because most of the first committees are by subject. So they might be 2 things that have nothing to do with each other. But you'll get to hear some other things, but you'll also have heard some of them before, so you'll be able to ask good questions, give good pros or cons. Then the top 9 from each second committee move on to third committee. And so that's, a total of, how many is that? 24 to 60? 117 proposals that move on, is what it looks like. So the committees are you're going to have 6 different committees in third committee. So what will happen is in third committee, you'll be assigned to a color. If your proposal moves on, you may be put in a different committee than the color you were assigned to originally. These are not made up of, oh, I was in committee A, so A is all in blue. It's all random. So that way, hopefully proposals can be heard by other people who haven't been hearing them the entire time. So there'll be 20 in some of those and 19 in some of those as well. So what's happening this year is we have added a third General Assembly, and I saw that Parker had a question over there about the third General Assembly. We decided to do this year. We're having the same number of proposals heard. So we still have 18 proposals that are going to be heard in General Assembly. But instead of being all day Wednesday with that break in the middle, General Assembly is going to be Wednesday morning only. So it's going to be Wednesday from 9 till about 12:30 or so. And that's time for us to hear the 6 proposals. So it's the same amount of proposals, but you'll get a better chance to speak because it's very hard to speak in General Assembly as it is. So it gives people more time, and it also allows us to have more time for plenary. So we added more proposals to plenary in recent years, and we ended up the last couple of years really kind of running over in time. So you'll have 6 different proposals that are in your General Assembly. So you'll see there are 18 moved there, and then the 12 top proposals from the entire conference go to plenary. So from third committee, your proposal either makes it to General Assembly or plenary, not both. So the top 12 overall, basically I think it's the top 2 from each third committee, move on to plenary. And then one of the third proposals, the third committee proposals rank 3rd through 5th, something like that, move on to the General Assembly to make up the 18. So, all right, well, we will move on from that. All right, so combining proposals, like I had mentioned before, that's something you can choose to do if you have somebody who has a similar topic to you. What I highly suggest is the proposals will come out sometime in June, and you'll be able to kind of see if there's other people who have similar proposals to you. Don't decide over the internet to combine with somebody or not, because sometimes people, you meet them and they're terrible speakers, and you don't want to speak, be attached to them the whole time. You don't want your fate to rely on them. Some people are just, people you couldn't get along with. So we've put up here some pros and some cons to combining. So one of the pros is obviously more research. So if all of you have done your job, you should have, a whole huge new thing of research out there, access to more people who might be an expert in some area of your topic that you're weaker in. So it could be really good to join forces that way. It also helps with topic fatigue. So if you're in a committee and 8 people have the exact same topic, you're going to be terribly bored listening to all of that. And people will rank your proposals poorly because obviously it's not original, and they're sick and tired of talking about it. There's no more debate to be had. So your proposal will not do well. So it can help with topic fatigue so they're not hearing it over and over again. It also helps share the responsibility among other people, so that way not everything is relying on your shoulders. You're not the one who has to necessarily answer every single question because you might not know the answer to it. So it gives somebody else the responsibility along with you. And it's also good to be able to work with other people. It helps you learn how to work with other people, and you can become really good friends. We've had some people in the past who combined and became really good friends with the people that they were combining with. Some of the cons are some of you have different ways of getting to the same end on a proposal, and you need to figure out what it is that you will not concede, what you will not change at all. Because there are some things that are deal breakers. So you need to think in your head, and I've got a worksheet for you to fill out to turn in with your speech that talks about things you're willing to give up. So some things you're willing to let change in your proposal if you combine with somebody, and things you absolutely will not waver on that you think are super important for your proposal. Sometimes you're also carrying the team. Some of these people haven't done any work ahead of time. Some of them are writing their speech in the bus. Some of them haven't even written a speech when they get there. So you might end up carrying the team. So you might end up having to do all the work. It's like working on a group project that I'm sure a lot of you have done before where somebody doesn't pull their weight. You also could have the opposite situation where you have a lot of people who really like to talk and you never get to speak. We had somebody a couple of years ago who made it to General Assembly, which is a great, feat. As you could see by the numbers, it's a really big deal to make it to General Assembly, but she never got to talk. She never said a word really in first, second, or third committee. So that victory wasn't really hers. And it's really frustrating when you've put in a lot of work and a lot of effort and they won't let you speak at all. So make sure that you're working with somebody and that you're getting to do the things that you want to do. It also can be very hard in that quick turnaround time to figure out speeches, non-debatable technical questions, author questions, etc. So figure out who's giving which part of the speech. So you guys can both give the opening speech if you want, have different parts you give. One of you can give the opening, one of you can give the closing. For non-debatable technical questions, one of you can answer all of them, or one you can alternate who answers them, or have somebody who's a subject matter expert answer those questions. So you have to figure out all of those little details. And then, like we said before, ranking. You are stuck with that person for ranking. So you have to, as long as your proposal is alive, you two have to sit by each other and you fill out that one form together and you have to agree on it. So basically you only get one vote. All right, and I know Spencer did a lot of research talk with you guys recently. So just to reiterate that the 5 sources that you have are just a start for what you should be researching. Your research notebook should be getting quite large now. It's really hard. Internet is terrible at Blue Ridge, so I would not rely on pulling up things on a tablet or on a phone or anything during committee. Make sure you have your research notebook printed out and that you have it organized, so that way you can find things in it. Don't just put a ton of research together. Organize it by category. I think it's really important to have a sheet up front that has your quick facts. So things that people might ask you about non-debatable technical questions, you could have answers to those up front. So you easily know, here's the answer, here's the source from where I got it. And like we said, make sure you're completing your research prior to Kona, because you should not be using the research room there to do research on your own proposal. The research room does not open, I think, until Monday during second committee. So you won't be able to do research on it right away anyways. So, but you should only be doing research on other people's proposals. Something else that's really important for you to do is to know the possible cons that will come up, as well as the non-debatable technical questions. So I do have a worksheet for you all to fill out that will have some possible cons that you think people might come up with against your proposal, and then you need to have answers for those, so how you will address those in your closing summation. All right, really briefly, just put on a map up here of the campus. As you can see, it's quite a large campus. It's on a mountainside, so it's, you know, it's really steep. It's a really steep walk to get from number 18, which is Eureka Hall, up to number 1, which is McCarty, where we've stayed the last couple of years. It's quite a hike up there. So just wanted you all to see this before we went. We'll look at it a bit later when we know for sure where we're staying. But just, I also wanted to emphasize the fact that some of you are looking for rides, so make sure that you all connect with each other if you're trying to carpool soon. Don't wait until June 1st, because we've had people who've waited in the past and then it gets to be June 1st and they have no ride. So try and figure that out now if you haven't already figured it out. And for those of you who have, thank you. All right, so if you were on the call earlier, you heard Mingy talk about pre-work, and you also all saw his email last week. It is very important that you adhere to deadlines, communicate with us, and do what you're supposed to do, because if you do not, you will not be coming to Kona with us. It's a sad thing, but it does happen. So please make sure you're keeping up with that. We do know it's a busy time of year, so tell us if you have things coming up. I know that Irene's going out of the country for a while, so I already have the dates, so I know, you know, kind of what's going on there. Mingy, do you want to go over the rest of the expectations, since this is usually your wheelhouse?
Yeah, I'm the bad guy, always, right? We've talked about some of this stuff before, but it's worth reminding you, you know, we dress from day one. And one thing that Sharon likes to talk about a lot is you get to make that opening speech the first day. A lot of people are going to be there in their state delegation t-shirt, talking about a very serious topic and looking halfway ridiculous doing so. We don't do that. We start with our MGA attire from the first committee meeting through the end. And if you read the Mountain Manual, it does give you a kind of stepping stones up, and some delegations do that. But you're starting to see more and more, or I've started to see more and more over the years, of delegations that dress from the beginning. And I think a lot of them are starting to think the same way we do. You just, if you are in a cheesy looking t-shirt trying to give a speech about something very, very serious, it takes away from, you know, what you're trying to say and the impact of what you're trying to say. And when you work so hard in that pre-work to make sure your speech is so good and so impactful, you don't want to do anything to take away from that. So we look good from the start. In terms of some of the games that go on, at Kona, we do not participate. So we talked about the dart game before, but just to reiterate that you're gonna see people playing it, and the moment you walk by and don't participate, they're gonna go, "Oh, you're from Virginia," and it's kind of a sign of respect from them that, hey, we do things our own way, and nothing to me is any more ridiculous than a person in a full suit or what have you lying on the ground because they have supposedly been darted and waiting for someone to help them out. At meals, it is not uncommon for a lot of states to have chants that they do during meals. Sit back and enjoy them, but do not create one for us. We will not be doing that. We do not participate in those chants at mealtime. And speaking of meals, we sit together at meals, and right away we'll pick a place where we will sit, and basically whatever members can get there first, reserve those tables for us for each meal, so we're always sitting together. The Mingy rule is kind of what was mentioned in the email the other day. If you're early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late. And if you're late, don't bother. And don't bother by taking it too far. But the reality is, we expect you, if you're told to be somewhere at 8 o'clock, that you're ready at 7:45. And that's not always going to be 100% possible. Some days it'll be you're closer to 8 getting there, but we expect to be early. So there's no doubt that we're going to be where we're supposed to be when we're supposed to be there. I think, Sharon, I'm going to hand off to you as far as communication and GroupMe stuff goes, because I don't want to say the wrong thing there.
Well, did you talk about the other part of the Mingy rule about who we call if somebody messes up badly?
Yeah, the long-standing tradition has been, if you mess up badly enough at Kona or in the future at NGA or whatever, the first phone call doesn't come to me. The first phone call comes to the local police, because once the call comes to me, there will be a murder, and we give the police a heads up. And that's at least somewhat facetious, I think. Sharon, I think, right?
Well, we haven't had to try it out.
No, not facetious.
So we're not sure. Other
No,
expectations.
they get back to the bear. That's legit murder, but it's acceptable in the map.
Yeah. So talking about communication and GroupMe, I appreciate those of you who have been keeping in touch with us, letting us know when you have things coming up or if you have a conflict with something. You are either using GroupMe or texting or emailing. So I appreciate those of you who have been doing that. Make sure you're making us aware of things well in advance. In the delegation announcement that I'm hoping to get posted tonight, it should have your assigned time for your speech practice webinars. Those are the things you signed up for on the doodle. And we have taken some care to make sure we tried to put veterans on each night and a good mix of people who aren't all from the same school or the same area to try and mix up so the groups are manageable as well. So I think we have about 3 or 4 of you signed up for each night. So make sure that you adhere to that. If something comes up and you can't make it, I need to know now, because we have to work some other things out, because we can't have 7 of you going one night. That's just far too many speeches and it will take way too long, and I need my sleep. So make sure you're not just the day of saying, oh, something came up tonight and I can't make it. That's not acceptable. We need to know in advance. Something else we've mentioned and other things as well is Premier delegation. That a lot of that relies on us getting our job done ahead of time, which we've done. All of your paperwork was in nice and early. We got everything to the conference on time. We have made the payments on time. So all of that is done. Now it's up to you all. So if you get up there and will not yield your time, that, like Mingy said, will reflect badly on the entire delegation. And that could lose Premier delegation for the group. If one of you is out after curfew, we could lose Premier delegation. A couple of years ago, it was the only year that we have not gotten Premier delegation, and it was because the person serving as our CLC representative woke up late and was 5 minutes late to the CLC meeting. That one bit of tardiness made all of us lose Premier delegation that year. So that's an award we always tell everybody we don't care. We want your proposals to do as well as possible. We care how far they go, but we're not there saying we have to get everybody to GA or plenary. We also don't necessarily, want you all gunning for any kind of awards they have for outstanding proposal or distinguished delegate or any of those things. We care most about premier delegation because that means that every single one of us has done our job properly. So don't show up late to committee, don't skip committee, don't leave committee and go get a Eureka treat and sit on the porch, because those are things that could reflect poorly on all of us. And your participation is very important. We expect you to be full participants this week. We don't expect you to get there and as soon as your proposal dies, to just sit there defeated the whole time. We want to see your placards up in the air. We want to see you trying to speak. We realize that it's very difficult once you get to third committee, then GA and plenary to get up and speak. It's hard to get recognized to speak, and you might have something awesome to say and you don't get chosen. It's heartbreaking when you want to do that. We sit in the back of the rooms and we look for your placards to be up. We look for that effort that you're doing. So we expect you to be full participants the entire time. If you're having a bad day, just shake yourself off and get over it and move on, because we want you to participate the entire time.
Hey, Sharon, one more thing about you were talking about premier delegation. I know it hasn't happened in a number of years, but one of my first years going to Kona, Wisconsin actually, because of a couple of violations by individuals, lost speaking privileges for their entire group for one day. So as we look at the various ways that it can penalize the group, not just the idea of giving premier delegation, but also the idea that we could actually lose speaking privileges. And again, it hasn't happened in a long time, and hopefully it won't to anybody. But, you know, again, your actions reflect not only on you, but they reflect upon our entire delegation.
Yes. All right.
Do you want to mention caucuses now, too? We're talking about premier delegation. That's another thing that weighs into that.
Go ahead.
So during, well, I guess technically at any point, but especially when you get to third committee and beyond, caucuses can be called. And a caucus simply will be that everyone in that particular committee will gather by a certain set location, usually a state sign or a state flag, and make sure that everyone's present and accounted for. And if you're not there and have not signed out to go to the research lab, or gone outside to the bathroom or something like that, then your state is going to lose its shot at premier delegation. And were there any last year? I don't remember any last year.
I don't think there were last year, but there have been years past where there's been like 2.
Yeah. So there is certainly people watching to see if people are leaving, and there's a number of student delegates up on the Eureka porch, you know, eating Eureka treats or what have you, and making sure people are where they're supposed to be. So if that happens and you're not where you're supposed to be, again, that penalizes all of us. So just be aware that you know, Kona especially, your actions are a reflection not only upon you, but upon all of us.
Yes. And Payne, just so you know, I always make the signs for the doors that have your names on them, and I think I handed them to a couple of people, and they took the roll of tape and decided to decorate. So that's kind of become a Virginia tradition over the years, is for people to decorate people's doors, not only with the door signs, but with the tape as well. So if you are a creative soul, then come find me when we get there and you can decorate the doors for everybody. The door signs will be already made, but you can have at it with the tape. The only thing is that you all have to clean the tape up. Last year, some of the tape was very intricate and small and very hard to get up. So just something we've done in the past. All right, so just a couple of reminders for deadlines. May 24th, your speech is due. So it's 2 minutes. But again, we urge you to make it about 1.5 minutes, 1:45. And then there's also some other documents that are due as well with that. The Start With Why document that I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar is on the Google site under Files, as well as a combining document and the cons document. I think I have them here so I can pull them up. All right, so for combining, up on your screen here, it has columns for things that are non-negotiables for you and things that you will concede to combine. These do not have to, they don't have to read left to right necessarily. It's just 2 separate columns. So what you say in your non-negotiables doesn't have anything to do with your concessions to combine. So I want you to fill this out. So if somebody were to come up to you and say, hey, my proposal is similar to yours, I think we should combine. What are some things that you absolutely will not negotiate on? Last year, we had some people who said, I'm going to give the opening speech. that is something I will not negotiate. Some of them said, I don't care who gives a speech. That's something they can negotiate. If there's certain facts or certain nuances about your proposal, you'll negotiate or you won't put those on there. So we want you to put some thought into that and send that to us. So that's one. Let's see. The cons document that's up here, we want you to think of possible cons to your proposal. So things that people could get up and speak negatively about your proposal. And then how will you answer those? We want you to have that thought out ahead of time so that way you're not taken by surprise by any of them. So that's something else to look at. And then the start with why document, it just has why is your proposal important? How will you accomplish it? What is your proposal seeking to do? And then we have some areas for you to put in how your proposal is important. Is it feasible? How is it feasible? And to talk about the originality of it. So we want you to turn those 3 into us along with your speech, just so we can see that you've put the time and effort into that. So those are all due May 24th. So you've got a little while to do that. May 28th, your speech feedback is due. You all have been doing a fairly good job of keeping on top of things with your feedback. So again, there's some samples of good comments if you're trying to figure out what makes a good comment. We also have samples of speeches up under files as well. So please take some time to read over some of those and see some speeches written by some of our former delegates. June 1st, your travel info is due, and then we've got a couple of different dates for speech webinars. Those are not the correct dates because I failed to update them, so I apologize, but they are the end of May. Let's see, May 28th, 30th, June 3rd, and June 5th. So my apologies, the PowerPoint was not updated, but that's when those will be, and I will let you know tonight on an announcement who is going to be where. All right, let's see. Something else I would like for you all to send to us are the goals that you have. I want to know what are 2 goals that you have for yourself at Kona. And I want you to send those to me. You can send them to me in a direct message on GroupMe or via email. But I want you to tell me 2 goals that you have for yourself the week you're at Kona. They can be something about speaking, how many times you want to speak, or things that you have control over. Don't say, I want to make it to GA or plenary. That's something that you've got some control over in how you prepare, but ultimately you could have other people who, their proposals just fare better than you. So we want these to be things you can actually obtain. So maybe meeting people from a certain number of states, or, some people, their goal is to eat a really good biscuit at the Red Rocker. So figure out 2 goals that you have for yourself that you can attain while you're at Kona, and send those to me via GroupMe or email in the next 48 hours or so. Do some time to think about that. All right, so we will take some questions now. I know I saw some up on the thing. Arrival time is between 3 and 5 p.m. on that Friday of Kona. So make sure that you are timing your trip to be there between 3 and 5. If you get to town early, just hang out in town. There's some cool restaurants in town and some other things to see. So stay there. Don't come up because we may not have anybody up there, and you can't just be left up there without an adult, a Virginia adult there. And also it's important that you're there by 5, so that way you can take some time to get settled in before we have dinner and get started for the evening. For the due date, I believe the 24th is what we had said in the delegation announcement. Spencer, did you have a different date?
No.
Okay. I believe it's the 24th, but again, read the delegation announcement. I believe that's what that says. So are there any other questions that you all have while we are together tonight? I think something to keep in mind is that we do not know yet where we are staying or who's going to be in which room, things like that. As soon as we have that information, we'll let you know, but it's likely going to be around June 1st maybe even a little bit later that we find out that information. So we will make sure we get you all of that as soon as possible. But other than that, Mingy, Spencer, anything to add?
Not for me.
I have two things. One, I think we went over, but I just want to reiterate is when you're giving your speeches, one of the things about you practicing and knowing as much as possible, you don't have to memorize the whole thing, although that's great if you do. But a lot of times focusing on trying to memorize the whole thing, you sound like a robot giving it because you're focusing on trying to remember everything that you wrote. But it is nice to practice it as much as you can so you know a bunch of it so you can kind of look down, but look back up. You want to make eye contact with your audience as much as possible, because when you don't, you disconnect yourself from them, especially after you've been debating in General Assembly. You've been in General Assembly all day and you've listened to speech after speech. If someone's not looking at you and not paying attention, is not making that eye contact with the audience, you kind of disconnect yourself from them and not pay attention to what they're saying as much. And the same can happen to you when you're giving your speeches. So practice as much to allow yourself to make as much eye contact with the audience as possible instead of focusing on your speeches written. I mean, you want to follow what you've written and what you have practiced, of course, but the more you practice it, the more you'll remember. That way you can just use your written speech as to look down real quickly as a guide and look back up and give it. The second thing is, and Sharon, correct me if this has changed this year, because this is the part I don't know. And I don't know if you went over this or not, but in GA is when reporters or the media staff is allowed to debate.
That's my GA and plenary, yes.
Yeah, GA and plenary. So our reporters out there, you're able to, starting in GA, you're allowed to be a part of the full debate. And I believe, Tommy, when you were a media delegate way back when, you actually did, starting in General Assembly, join debate and didn't report as much going forward from this day, if I'm not mistaken. So it is possible. And if that is something you can either, there's plenty of things to do as a media delegate throughout the entire conference to do, because I believe Jackson was, focused on a lot of media stuff, so he didn't debate, but Tommy did, and whatever your choice is, you have the option. That's it.
All right. And to answer Olivia's question she asked on the side, in case you can't see it, if you are taking public transit, so if you're taking, if you're going to the airport or taking a train, the train doesn't come anywhere near, but if you're taking some sort of public transit, you are responsible for getting yourselves to Black Mountain. So I would suggest Uber, because with Uber, you can share your ride with us so we can see the progress you're making to make sure that your Uber driver is taking you the right place, and see about what your arrival time is. It's one of the safest things you can do, because with cabs, you can't really do that. So we highly suggest Uber. And I know that Parker is going to be flying back on that Friday, Olivia, so the two of you can probably Uber together to go back, but he's driving there. And for those of you who still don't have a ride, like I said, just please try and contact you have everybody's contact information on the contact sheet. You also have GroupMe. So if you're looking for a ride, please make sure you're asking some people. I know that a couple of people have indicated that they have space to bring people. So if you can make it to them, then you should be good to go. So any other questions while we are all together?
Sharon, can I add one tip?
Yeah, go for it.
Sure. Something that worked for me great last year was actually working the room before giving my speech. As it turned out, I was friends with a bunch of the delegates because they were also governors, and I found that the room was a lot more receptive to me because I had known those people, and because I'd also just chatted with people in the room, shaking their hands, So especially in first and second committee, I would really recommend that just to warm the room up to you, so they're more receptive.
Definitely, that's great. And it's also good to use the connections of some people like Tommy and some of our other folks who've been before. So they might know people who are in your committee and could make an introduction ahead of time, which could help break the ice for you in that room as well. You'll see some states that will plant a ton of questions. One of the things we'll talk about in our speech webinars is that you can try and plant a pro speech, give some people some ideas for things they could say to help boost up your proposal that you might not have time for. Some questions that you really want to get asked, you could help plant those. Don't go as far as preparing them ahead of time and handing them out. Several years ago, one of the delegations had pre-printed non-debatable technical questions they passed out to the entire room ahead of time. And that's just bad form to have everything that manufactured ahead of time. Make friends, make connections, but don't, make it fake. So that is all I have. So thank you all for your time tonight. I'm going to post this very soon, but let us know if you have questions on those documents you have to turn in along with your speech. And we look forward to talking to you all soon. And happy graduation to those of you graduating soon. So have a great night.